However, we are hopeful. I mean, looking at the trend that has been happening, we have seen the courts performing their role. We are hopeful that this election is going to give us a turning point in our country.
We're working for the Southern Africa Liaison Office. We're trying to get a brief of where you guys are. What are the emerging issues? What are the challenges? What's the status of the politics, political economy, whatever you put it, in Malawi? And what would you want the region to focus on or to be able to do, particularly governments, especially the ANC in South Africa and the leverage that South Africa has in the region? What do you expect the region and by extension the international community to be able to do to help your situation so that the election is as close to what you would expect it to be, but also that the post-election environment ensures that the people of Malawi are able to build and take their country forward?
My name is Gift Trapensa. I'm the chairperson of Human Rights Defenders Coalition, HRDC. Human Rights Defenders Coalition is a coalition of organizations, but as well individuals from grassroots, from the rural areas and up to urban areas. So it's a network of different actors, from individuals to organizations. We are new, but Malawians love HRDC, and it has done a lot of work within the past 2 years that this network was formed, primarily to protect the rights and promote the rights of human rights defenders, but as well at the same time protecting the civic space, promoting good governance and democracy in Malawi.
I'm Billy Mayaya, a human rights defender, and I also work as regional coordinator for the Central Region for HRDC.
Okay, so I am Beatrice Mateo. I work for an organization called Coalition for the Empowerment of Women and Girls, in short, CWAG. I am the executive director and the founder. Basically, we aim to see that women and girls are living in a society that is free of gender-based violence. They should be able to take part in leadership positions, as well as being actively engaged in all issues affecting their lives. I am also a member of the HRDC, Human Rights Defenders Coalition.
I think the issues in Malawi are underlining the elections that we had in 2019, on 21st May 2019, where we had presidential, parliamentary, and the local council elections. These elections were contested against by the opposition. We had a case in court that went through for the past 11 months. Malawians were also demonstrating against the elections, because issues that political parties, the opposition specifically, were raising, that the elections were marred with irregularities, where they used TPEX, and yet TPEX was not part of the process. So on 3rd February, there was a ruling from the High Court where they nullified the presidential election. At the same time, the ruling party now, they appealed to the Supreme Court, but also the Supreme Court sustained the judgment of the Constitutional Court in nullifying the elections.
Our country is at crossroads. Our country requires the intervention of the international community, because we all know that as a country we went to the polls in 2019, and we all aware that the elections were nullified by the competent court of law. And the situation that we have at hand is that the law gave 150 days for another election to happen. That in principle extended the tenure of Mutharika to facilitate another election in 150 days, meaning he's a caretaker president because his term expired. But Mutharika's government has been working negatively to frustrate the whole electoral process. There have been a lot of efforts to delay the elections.
I think there's a concern about the politicization of the COVID crisis, the pandemic. I think because that has given quote unquote leverage to the government to postpone the elections by exaggerating the nature and scope of the pandemic. And that is a key concern to us as civil society, for us to do our advocacy and lobbying, particularly in terms of demonstration and mobilizing the people, as well as ensuring that the key issues that underlie our political crisis are addressed by civil society. Secondly, I think we're also concerned with the government's flouting of court orders, because the government is under obligation to ensure that the rule of law is maintained. Now, if they are pushing the issue to Parliament to say you have to undo the court ruling, I think it doesn't make sense, and it plunges the whole country into a political crisis. I think there's a gap in terms of how the government would deal with fresh elections. For example, the elections were annulled, but then there was no provision in the constitution on how fresh elections can take place, can take shape and form. So there was urgency in addressing that gap by proposing the amendment of the constitution.
So if we do not have an election as a country on 3rd July, it shall mean that we shall not have a president, because his mandate was only extended by the court. So what I can say is that we have a president who is living in denial, and a president who is ready to do anything to stay in power. And if we are not careful, we are going to have a serious constitutional crisis in the country.
In terms of the timeline to the fresh polls, I agree that we don't have enough time. And I foresee a situation where the 150 days will elapse and there'll be a constitutional crisis. Now, in that regard, there's need for advocacy and lobbying on our part as civil society to demand the constitution of a transitional body or arrangement to oversee the elections, because the mandate of the president and the vice president will have elapsed.
Because the parliament is the only institution that is mandated to prepare the bills for an electoral process, is the only institution mandated even to prepare the date for an election. Mutharika refused to sign the bills. To date, he has never signed. Now, after the determination of the Supreme Court, it means the Supreme Court was very clear that it's only the parliament again which has got the powers to determine the date. But as I speak, Mutharika was using his incompetent electoral commission to be coming up with dates. They came up with 2nd of July. Later on, they changed to 23 July. It has been confusing people. And they started the registration process of an electoral process, and it was mad with a lot of irregularities. They were registering underaged. They have been procuring, the voter cards all across the country. Shamelessly, people have been arrested doing the same. There have been even some DPP cadets. These are the youth operatives of DPP, the party for Mutharika. These people have been even caught breaking electoral materials at the registration center. Immediately they are arrested, they're sent to the police, they are released instantly.
So what has been going on is that the civil society and Malawians have been demanding for the resignation of the chairperson of the Malawi Electoral Commission, of which that chair has resigned. And also the term for the other commissioners came to an end on 5th June last week. So at the process, at the moment, we are supposed to have the new commission. And the president actually wrote the Judicial Service Commission to appoint the chairperson.
Because the law provides that there must be 8 days where the election happens, and if anybody has a concern, can raise that concern within 8 days. I think as a country, we should have been ready by far. 150 days was enough to prepare for another election. But the problem is Mutharika was living in denial. When the court declared the MEC incompetent, when the parliament declared MEC incompetent, when the citizens of Malawi demonstrated massively against the same MEC, Mutharika was supposed to fire MEC so that new commissioners should be appointed to start working on the electoral process. But what he did, he insisted on the same incompetent commissioners against the court and against the parliament. Why was he insisting? Because those commissioners literally are behaving like a department of DPP government, a DPP party. They're not behaving like a commission that can be trusted. But now we still have a problem. Mutharika is playing drain tactics. He has appointed a new MEC, and his party was supposed to submit 3 names. And the party for the opposition, MCP, was supposed to submit 3 names. But what Mutharika did, he has taken 4 names from his party and only 2 names from Malawi Congress Party, creating another confusion with the hope that if they go to court, the process can be dragged further. He has included 2 incompetent MEC commissioners deliberately to create that delay that people should start fighting, and maybe people should just start going to court to extend the process. So in short, I would say, if we have a MEC, Malawi Electoral Commission, that can be trusted, I think if it can make a request of an extension, the court will listen. But as it stands, we are prepared as a people to vote on 23rd. You know, we cannot continue living in a country of lawlessness.
We have seen new waves of violence during campaign meetings, and largely this is coming from the state. So it looks like the state, the ruling party, would want to create a situation that makes the country ungovernable, and then they should use that as a reason to declare a state of emergency, and even to justify the fact that we cannot have elections at this point in time.
So when the opposition members go to do campaign in their areas, they've been attacked. The vice president, SALO Chirima, who is the running mate to Dr. Chakwera, has been attacked twice, his convoy. Myself, I was also attacked in Mzuzu with my team. These people are doing this in daylight, and they're not afraid of anyone. They'll put even in their party cars. The police cannot do anything because the police is in the armpits of Mutharika.
I think the issue of international observers has had an impact in terms of Malawians asking questions. The last elections that were nullified by the courts, the international observers were there. SADC was there. Yeah, so what we have seen is a code fit that has been developed by the international observers because they haven't addressed the underlying issues from the previous general elections. If the elections were nullified by 2 courts, this means that there was a problem. Now, if the reports of the international observers were showing contrary to what the courts found, it means that it put into question on the work of the international observers in our context. I mean, that's the challenge that we have seen in terms of international community not talking about observation, not talking about taking part in the fresh elections, because they haven't talked anything. They have a dilemma in terms of how are they going to come in when they were there in the last elections. And maybe we haven't had a conversation in terms of their role during the previous elections. And what is it that we can learn from that process where it was nullified, and at the same time they were part and parcel of the observation missions during that time. So maybe that's a challenge that international community are finding themselves in. I think they have a dilemma in terms of how can they come in. If they come in, are they going to be trusted?
Gift has outlined very clear in terms of the role of the international community. It is very sad that at the moment they have, I think the EU already gave out a statement that they are not going to observe these elections, including SADC. So I think we need to demand some sort of independent monitoring from international observers.
As an organization, we are not monitoring in an official capacity as an organization, but as an individual, myself, I am going to take an active role in monitoring. Because one thing I have noticed is that most Malawians, ordinary Malawians, don't consider themselves as monitors, as they can take a role in, protecting their vote. So this time around, I am going to actively participate as a monitor. I want to ensure that I monitor my vote so that, I fulfill my rights.
Apart from that, they said that the international observers are not present to monitor the fresh elections. I think it will be important to have resources either from the SADC or from the certain government that can allow the local actors like the civil society to take part in the monitoring.
Now to the key and last question. What are your key asks to the ANC using South Africa's leverage in the region, to the SADC region, to the international community? What are your key asks?
Okay, thank you so much. The first one would be the ANC has got a critical role to play within the region. And we strongly believe that their intervention in terms of, one, reaching out to Mutharika to tell him to say he has got a duty to respect the rule of law. He has got the duty to respect his own parliament and citizens. It's important that Mutharika should be engaged. And the ANC, SADC, even the international community should put an eye of the upcoming Malawi election.
We want the leadership from the South African government and ANC to make sure they're able to talk to the Malawi government, to make sure that they're able to respect, Malawi government is able to respect the rule of law, is able to respect the court decision. Because what we are expecting is that after the 150 days that the court gave Malawi to have elections, we can have a constitutional crisis. And we are afraid that that can trigger into fighting.
Now, in terms of the role of the ANC, I think it is critical that we demand some sort of mediation process as regards the role of the ANC and other regional governments. The unprecedented court ruling in Malawi is an opportunity for all regional governments to consolidate democracy. And therefore, their support to Malawi during this crisis is fundamental to ensuring that the consolidation of democracy pans out throughout the region. Secondly, I think we need to emphasize the fact that for democracy to take shape and form, we need to, as Happy rightly noted, that we need a transformational process in terms of truth and reconciliation in Malawi, because there are so many unresolved issues which continually creep up and affect the progress of our democratic experiment.
I think the first thing would be to call upon all those that are contesting in the presidential elections to desist from violence. They should focus on issue-based campaigns. What is it they are going to do for our country once they have been elected into power? Yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing is that now after voting, whoever is voted into power, especially if it happens that the opposition has won, to call upon the current president to respect, to ensure that the rule of law is adhered to. I mean, you have seen how the campaign is happening. The judges are being discredited, that whatever they did is not according to law, is not according to whatever. There's a lot of hate speech. So for me, I think it's these two things: calling upon all the leaders to desist from violence, and then secondly, to ensure that after voting, the rule of law is adhered to.
It's clear that the current president, Mutharika, would do everything to stay in power, be it using the law or against the law. So, citizens of Malawi have come from a very difficult situation where we have had a wave of demonstrations, for the past months. And people have been looking at an election as an opportunity for the country to move forward. So anybody, including Mutharika, who comes to frustrate the process, it will be like we are sitting on a time bomb. I have to be very honest to ANC, SADC, even the international community, the UN inclusive, to say, look, we better correct things now. It's too late, because I can see our people impatient. People will be demonstrating, and we don't know. The reaction of Mutharika government always to demonstrations is violent. Mutharika government, they have been able even to hire some violent people to bring violence in demonstrations just to dent the image of demonstrations. So the huge appetite of Mutharika to stay in power can lead to, to violence in the country. We as human rights people, we do not want that. And we believe the ANC, SADC, and the entire international community should intervene now on Malawi, rather than waiting. When it is worse, then they should be thinking of coming to Malawi. Because when 150 days expires, Mutharika will not be allowed by the people to rule them. So this is where I can see a constitutional crisis looming. So the faster ANC, SADC, and even the entire international community intervenes on Malawi, reasons with Mutharika for the importance of him to comply with the law, with the judgment of the Constitutional Court, the judgment of the Supreme Court,